Welcome to today's webinar on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's individual artist grants for fiscal year 2020. I'm Carolyn Koska, the Financial and Grants Administrator for Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC. First, I'll just run down what we're going to be talking about today. We'll talk a little bit about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. We'll look at the guidelines for the 3 different programs that we have for individual artists. We'll also take a look at the resources that are available for you on our website and go into our online grant system, take a look at the application questions for these programs. Then we'll talk a little bit about just the whole grant process, what happens after you submit an application. The Southwest Minnesota Arts Council is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services, which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor and/or create and promote the arts in their communities. So here is our region that we cover. We are one of 11 regional arts councils covering the state of Minnesota. Our funding comes from the state of Minnesota, both from their general fund and through the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund, and also from the McKnight Foundation. 2 of our grants today are funded through the McKnight Foundation funds and 1 through the state legacy funds. Some things that we're committed to: supporting artists and arts organizations in creating, producing, and presenting high-quality arts activities, overcoming barriers to accessing high-quality arts activities, instilling the arts into the community and public life, supporting high-quality, age-appropriate arts education for all ages to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding of the arts, and supporting events and activities that represent the diverse ethnic and cultural arts traditions of the region. So these are some things to keep in mind while you're thinking about what kind of project you might want to do to make sure that it matches up with these commitments. So first we're going to talk about our individual artist grants for emerging and established career artists. These are 2 different programs, but they're very similar, so we'll talk about them together. They are open to adult artists in the 18 counties of our service region. Applicants need to be living in our region for at least 6 months before submitting an application and stay in the region throughout their project. Funding under this program can fund either projects that help to increase the public awareness of your work or projects that help you kind of progress to a new level in your artistic development or career. We really want to be able to allow artists to just work from their inspiration and creativity and not really worry about, is this going to sell? And we're hoping that these grants enable artists to be able to live and work in this region. Here are some examples of projects that you could do with these grants. You could purchase supplies that you need to complete a body of work. Use the funds to compensate yourself for the time that you're spending working on that. Attend a workshop or conference. Study with a mentor, develop a portfolio, rent space for either presenting your work or studio space. This can cover daycare costs while you're working on your art, framing, recording, editing, research. So a lot of options. And now to differentiate the 2 programs, the one for emerging artists is really for artists who are at an early stage of their career. They probably haven't done a lot yet as far as shows or performances or publishing, depending on their discipline. But really what they've done so far looks promising. And at this point, they haven't really been acknowledged by other artists in their field as being established artist. And then for our established career artists, these are professional artists, and they've probably had a lot of solo shows or performances or have done quite a bit of publishing, and they're really at an advanced stage in their career, and those other artists and arts professionals in their field have recognized them as an established artist. If you're having a hard time deciding which category to apply under, you can give us a call and talk through, and we can kind of direct you to the right one. Usually, if you're not sure, you're kind of on the line between the two, it's better to apply as an emerging artist first. And the emerging artist grants are available for up to $2,500, and the established career artist grants are available for up to $7,000. And no match is required from you for either of these, so you are not required to spend any of your own money on these projects. Here are some eligibility items to think about, and this list is all things that are not eligible for these grants. Projects that are for mass market distribution or anything else that's really commercial, self-publishing, equipment requests that are not specifically for the project that you're doing, credits or materials to fulfill degree requirements for students. As a college student, you could apply, but it would have to be a project that's totally separate from what you are doing for school. Also ineligible applications that are mostly about developing curriculum plans or other teaching materials and that are focused on advancing your teaching career. We really want to help artists in their artistic development as an individual versus their teaching. Projects that don't have an art focus are not eligible. Requests for new building construction or purchase of real estate, activities for the religious socialization of the participants or audience, activities that attempt to influence any state or federal legislation, payments of any debts incurred before the grant begins, and applicants with a past SMOC grant project still in progress. So you can only be doing one of these grant projects at a time. So this is just kind of an overview of some of those guidelines. It's a good idea to check. We have both program guidelines that are specific to these programs and general guidelines that apply to all of our grants. And I'll show you later where those can be found, but it's a good idea to really read through those as well. The other grant program that we have is the Individual Artist Community Collaboration Grant, open to the same group of people. And this is the one that is funded through state legacy funds. The other two were funded through McKnight Foundation funds. So the intent of this grant program is to fund projects that bring an artist and a community together in a creative and collaborative relationship. And we're looking for these projects to really have a lasting impact on both the artist and the community. So it does have this kind of dual focus. First, we want the artist to be able to reach a new level in their artistic development through creating a new work. And also we want the artists to be collaborating with the community to introduce them to the arts in a new way, and also be reaching a part of the population that doesn't normally come in contact with this art form. The project also should really tie into the community itself. For this grant, the artist needs to have a community partner organization that will help out with the project. For instance, they might be able to do the advertising and have the connections that the artist may not be able to do, or provide space for the activities to take place. The community partner can be organizations like a city government, chamber, arts council, historical society, or other nonprofit, but it can't be a school. The community collaboration grants are available for up to $10,000, and again, no match is required. So in addition to those restrictions we talked about with the other two individual artist grants, these items here are also not eligible for this grant. Fees for entering jury competitions, taking classes or workshops, traveling for research, activities that take place outside of Minnesota, since we are using state funds to fund this program, activities that are not open to the public, requiring artists to pay excessive fees, or educational projects within a school system. For all three of these grants, you'll need to choose both a project start date and end date. We consider the start date to be the point that your project really is set in motion. That could include things like you're starting to order supplies that you need to do advertising, having rehearsals. So you can't spend any money before the project start date. If there's something comes up where you really do need to spend money on a certain thing before your start date, if you have to put down a deposit on a workshop you're going to attend, then you could not include that amount in your grant budget. You'd have to pay for that separately outside of the grant project. And no advertising can take place before the start date. You can do very basic things like saying, this is the date that this is going to happen. You could post that, but no true advertising. You'll also need to choose an end date for your project, making sure that you allow yourself plenty of time to do what you've planned, and give yourself maybe a little cushion as well to make sure all bills have come in, that everything's really wrapped up by that project end date. We have two deadlines this year for all three of these artist programs. Round one deadline is coming up pretty soon, August 14th, for projects starting October 1st or later. And then our second round, the deadline is January 8th for projects starting March 1st or later. And note here that all applications need to be submitted by 4:30 p.m. on the deadline date. Our system will not allow you to submit after that time. Any questions? Not seeing any questions so far. We will move on. We're going to take a look at what is available to you on our website. Here on our homepage, you've got a link to log into that grant system right here. And you can also access that on any of the individual pages for our grants. So we'll take a look at what is on one of these grant pages. Here again is that other button to access the grant system, and you can click the Apply Now button even if you have already applied and are just trying to get back in. It just takes you to that login screen. So available on each grant program page, you'll see the specific guidelines for that program, along with the general grant guidelines that apply to all of the grant programs. So as I mentioned before, very important to read both of those. You have the application questions that are in an editable document in case you'd like to kind of write a draft in there and then paste your answers into the online application later. There's a budget form here, although that's also available within the application. Here is a list of the criteria that the grant reviewers will be using to score your grant, so you have a little bit of an idea what to expect for that. And then we've also got a brief overview video tutorial of the grant system that's pretty general, and we have the grant system guide here as well, which goes into a lot more specifics of kind of what every button does in the grant system. It also lists the deadlines for you and some other important dates in the process. And if you are hoping to register for another webinar, the links are available here to register. So we're going to head into the grant system and take a look at the application. When you're logging in for the first time after just creating your account, you'll go straight to this apply page. Otherwise, logging in again, you'll go directly to your dashboard. But the apply page lists all of the grant programs that we have currently available. So you can scroll through and find the one that you need. We'll take a look at the Emerging Artist program right now. You can first preview the form here if you just want to look at it without starting anything. Otherwise, you can click this Apply button to get started. We've got a couple new buttons up here this year. This Copy Previous Answers. If you've done an application before, it'll copy over for you any answers that are, or answers to any questions that are the same in both applications. So that can give you a little bit of a head start if you've done one before. Also, we have a Collaborate button where you can invite someone else to work with you on your application. So starting out the application, you'll need a name for your project. This doesn't have to be anything fancy, just something so you know which one this is, and so that we can have a little idea of what you're proposing to do. Here's where you can put in the amount you're requesting. You'll probably want to wait until you finished your budget form to enter that in. We've got some links to those guidelines again here and the document with the application questions in it. And just to note that a lot of the fields have quite a big limit on the characters in case there's something that you really need to say a lot about, but just to caution that the grant reviewers really appreciate short, concise answers. Make sure to answer the question fully, but the reviewers are going to be reading through a lot of grants at once, so make sure to keep it short. And here again is the criteria for this program that they will be using to score your application. So here's where you'll describe what you're wanting to do with your project. If your project is something where you are producing new work, you'll need to talk a little bit about what your artistic vision is for that project, what kind of aesthetic you're going for, what you're trying to say with your work. If instead you're doing a study opportunity like a workshop or a conference, you can put information about that here and qualifications of any instructors. There's an upload field if you want to put in a resume or some samples of the instructor's work along with a website related to that opportunity. Here are your dates for the project, start and end date. And then we've got the budget section here. What you'll do is download this Excel budget form, and you can save that to your computer, fill it out. Detailed descriptions are good of all of the costs for your project. It reminds you the caps for the amount you can request. You can stick your request amount in there. If your total project is going to cost more than what you're allowed to request, you can put in here any other funding sources that you are using to fund your project. So you would fill this out, save it, and then go back and upload it in this field. This next section is really important because this lets our reviewers see the quality of your work and your experience. You will need to provide a resume that's related to your art, separate from a non-art resume that has maybe your work history. If you have a website, you can put that in here. If you do folk or traditional art, there's another question specifically for that about your connection to that cultural community and what recognition you or your work might have from them. And then here's where you put in samples of your work. There's some guidelines depending on what kind of samples you're wanting to submit. But we've got 3 quite large upload fields, along with a spot to describe what it is that you have provided. Only one file will fit in each field. So if you're trying to get, for instance, these 10 images that are allowed, you might have to combine several of them into one document in each field. We also have several website fields available too if you have a performance posted on YouTube that you'd like people to see, or any other website. Then we ask a few questions about how this project will contribute to your growth as an artist. We also collect a little data about you. This information has no bearing on the scoring of your application. It's just some data that we need to collect. For these codes, you click on the link and it'll bring up a list of your choices. So you just choose which one fits you best and enter that into the field there. And then just some information about the name that you use, and you will type in your name here as your electronic signature. So down at the bottom, we have our save button. The system does do an autosave kind of every time that you click out of a field. But if you also want to be manually saving your application too, that button is here. And when you're ready to submit, there's the submit application, keeping in mind that you won't be able to edit anything within your application once you submit it. We also have the abandon button if you find that you've started in the wrong program or started a second one that you didn't mean to. You can just click that button there to take that out of your application list. For now, we're going to save. And you'll see when you do that, it lets you know all of the questions that you have not answered yet. To get back in, you would push continue here. But for now, we're going to go back to your dashboard. So you see here is our application that we just started listing here. If you want to get back into it, just click the Edit Application button. If you're awarded a grant, this is where you'll come back to for accessing the contract that you have to do, along with your final report that you have to fill out. Those will be listed here as well. Now we're also going to take a look at the community collaboration grant, because that application is quite different from the one for the emerging and established career. Those are very similar. So here's our community collaboration grant. Some things that are different, like before you're doing your project artistic vision, you'll have to talk about how this project will leave an arts legacy here in the region. You've got a place to upload some more materials related to your project. A lot of questions about the community that you're working in and how the community residents will be involved in the project. We also really want you to include any underserved groups in your project. You'll first list the groups in your community that are underserved or underrepresented. And then for the second question, you will say how you're going to reach out to at least one of those groups in a specific way through your project. Here's the information about the community partner organization that you're going to be working with, along with an agreement between you and that partner that spells out the roles that you have, rules about using their space, etc. That's something that you will come up with between you and the organization. A little information about your planning timeline. Here's where you can list any events that are related to this project that are open to the public. It's important to have all the details here so that we can post that on our area arts calendar. And you'll also have to talk a little bit about the publicity that you're using. Here's that same section about your work. It's exactly the same as in the other applications, and about the growth that this will give you. Then another different thing, again, because we're using those state legacy funds, is you need to have an outcome evaluation plan. There are some statewide Minnesota arts outcomes to look through. You'll need to choose one for yourself and as an artist, and one for the community project in general that you're hoping to have, at least one for each. And then for each of those outcomes that you chose, you'll need to describe what skill, knowledge, attitude, behavior will change as a result of your project, and who does that affect. And then come up with a plan for measuring or proving that those changes have taken place. And there is an example here for this program. Here's their project, here are the outcomes they've chosen, who is affected by each one, what changes they're hoping for, and then their plan for measuring or evaluating. There's also a spot to upload if you're using a survey. The budget form is a little different. It's just a little more specific than the one for the others. It kind of breaks it down into different types of expenses. Put in your grant request, and then again, those other funding sources if the cost is more than the grant. Our same data section and signature. Any more questions at this point? Again, I don't see any questions, so we will keep moving forward. Some tips to keep in mind when you're working on your grant. It's really good to start early so that you have time to kind of gather all of those pieces that you're going to upload and get your plan together, be able to get any questions answered about your project. Also good to read those guidelines carefully. Read all of the questions in the application fully and make sure some of them have multiple parts. So make sure you've covered each part of the question in your answer. As we said before, keep your answers clear and concise. It's also really good to assume that the grant reviewers don't know anything about you or your artwork or your project. We have reviewers coming from around our whole region, so they may not know or be familiar with your work. It's also really good to have somebody proofread your application. We are here to advocate for you and help you have the best application that you can have. So please feel free to call and talk to us about your project before you start an application. If you're unsure about some eligibility or which program you should apply under, just call and we can help you with those questions. Also, we can help with any questions you run into as you're filling out your application. And then we can also review your application before you submit it before the deadline. If you just send us an email or call us and say, I think I have this pretty much together, can you take a look? And we can let you know if there's something you're missing or if there's a different way you should have answered a question. So we can do that for sure up to 2 weeks before the deadline. Otherwise, if it's after that, we can't guarantee that we're able to look at it. So once you've submitted your application, we review that for eligibility and completeness, again, making sure you have everything that you needed. And then a panel of individuals from our region will score your applications and then meet together to discuss them. They may adjust their scores, but that's all based on the criteria for the grant program, which we'll look at in a minute. And then those scores and discussion goes on to our board, who will approve funding based on the recommendations from that review panel. So here's a look at the criteria they'll be using. For the emerging and established career artists, they will look at the artist's excellence of work. That's worth 18 points. The project's contribution to the artist's professional growth, 10 points, and the feasibility of the project for 3 points. For the community collaboration grants, there are a few more things that are considered. Again, the artist's excellence of work for 18 points, the artistic merit of the project for the community, 18 points, the actual collaboration part of the project with the community, 10 points, the project's contribution to the artist's growth for 10 points, feasibility of the project for 5, and then that outcome evaluation plan for 3 points. And you'll need to pass all of these individual criteria in order to be considered for funding. If your grant is awarded, you'll need to do a contract within 30 days of being notified. Then after completing your contract, you'll receive 80% of your grant award before your start date, and then you'll get the remaining 20% of your award after your project and your final report are completed and approved. You'll need to acknowledge the grant using a credit line that we'll give you on any publicity or promotional materials. If you're doing the community collaboration grant, you'll most likely need to include this Minnesota Legacy logo in your publicity. And all of those credit lines and logos will be sent to you, so you don't have to worry about getting the right one. You'll also need to complete a final report within 60 days after your project end date. And it's a good idea to look through that final report right away after you have done your contract and are just getting started on your project to make sure you know what information you'll need to gather during your project. We are available in our office in Marshall Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. There's not always someone here over the noon hour, so you may want to check if you're deciding to stop in then. Again, call or email us with any questions that you may have. Thanks for joining us today. We hope to hear from you soon.